In many ways, April was a bounce back month for me. My reading totals had been a lot lower in February and March because I was really busy with a lot of work things and a bit of travel, but I bounced back with 8 books in April, 4 genres, and get this, my book of the month is a work of nonfiction. Stay tuned. Welcome to my April book reviews. I want to share with you short reviews of everything that I read this month. 8 books, 4 genres. I have the genres in chapters below if you want to skip around. And the book of the month is a really good one that I think a lot of you would like. I will put that last. Since I am finishing with a work of nonfiction, I'm going to start with one as well. And this is a book called A Cure for Gravity, A Musical Pilgrimage by Joe Jackson. Now, I went into this one not knowing anything about it. This is Joe Jackson's memoir. And I didn't know anything about Joe Jackson, except I vaguely remember him being kind of a rock star of some sort in the early 80s, but I didn't really know anything about him, didn't know anything about his music. But one of my great viewers, Heidi, recommended this to me, and she actually sent this to me. So thank you, Heidi, and you were right, I really love this book. This was a really fantastic read. What's interesting about this memoir is that you don't have to know anything about Joe Jackson to enjoy it. Because in many ways, this book is kind of a coming-of-age tale. This book starts with kind of his early years, just trying to figure out who he is as a person, and then when he discovers that he's a musician, trying to discover what kind of musician he wants to be. He was actually educated at one of the top schools of music, colleges of music in the United Kingdom, and he was just trying to figure out what he wanted to do in the music business or, the music profession in general. So this is kind of a coming-age story that actually stops when he gets famous, which I found very interesting choice narratively. A thing I have to say about this is, you see on the title here, Joe Jackson. It's not Joe Jackson with. A lot of kind of celebrity memoirs, you have the name of the celebrity, and then you see at the bottom with. And you kind of know that the with is the person that did all the heavy lifting, the person that crafted the narrative into some kind of cohesive story that flows from one thing to another. Several times while reading this, I felt that if Jackson had not been a musician, he would have had a future as a writer, because I think he wrote this book very, very well. The stories I liked so much were just about kind of his musical philosophy wrapped up in this coming-of-age story as he just kind of discovers who he is as a musician. If there's one flaw, I think, with this book, is the last half of the book. There are just a lot of stories about Jackson in dive bars and dive pubs with his band as they're clawing their way up the music business. And it got a little bit repetitious at the end, a little repetitive, a little monotonous. But even so, each chapter kind of had a point. It was almost like each chapter he had a topic he wanted to talk about. So even though it took place in a pub, he was talking about, playing to different audiences, or talking about different aspects of the music business. So I really enjoyed this one. I think this is something that I can recommend for anybody. I honestly still haven't listened to anything by Joe Jackson, but I certainly did enjoy his memoir quite a bit. My apologies if you hear the mowing outside. I have exactly 22 minutes to shoot this video before I have to go out the door. So I'm shooting, sorry for the ambient noise. The next book I'm going to talk about is Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke. This is a classic in the science fiction genre. Maybe not Clarke's most famous work, but it's up there, probably top 3. And this is a story of first contact, kind of. This is future Earth, where there's a huge object in space that's coming on a straight line trajectory towards our solar system and our sun. And they name it Rama. And this book is The Rendezvous with Rama. They discover Rama and they explore the environment within it. It's a big kind of obelisk, and it's so huge it has like whole cities within it, and it's just a really quick story. I mean, this is about 200 pages. I put this down in probably about 3 hours. I would say I struggled with aspects of this. One of the things I struggled with was visualizing Rama. Now, admittedly, I'm not good at that. I'm not a good visual reader, unless the author's really good. I talked about this with Tagana, with Guy Gavroche, when I did my dual book review. And when an author's really good, it helps me. But for someone who's not a very good visual reader, I really struggled trying to picture just about every aspect of Rama, especially once they started exploring inside it. You know, there's certain things when you encounter classic science fiction, you know, that you're not going to get. For instance, you're usually not going to get a lot of depth of character. You're going to get more exploration of ideas and things like that. So going into it, I knew that. But there was an aspect of this that I really struggled with as well. And it seemed like once they started exploring Rama, that every chapter Clarke just wanted to explore a different branch of science. So, okay, here's our geology chapter, and we're going to explore geology in Rama. Here's our meteorology chapter. We're going to explore the weather within Rama. And here's our biology chapter, you know. And for me, it was just, it made the narrative quite disjunct, and it didn't feel like a very cohesive whole, at least at that point in the book. Now, again, this is a short book. Once you get through those chapters, which were a bit of a struggle for me to get through, the ending's really, really great. But as someone said on the Discord the other day, it didn't feel like it was part of the rest of the book. So it's kind of a disjunct reading experience, to be honest. I can recommend it because it's short, and there's a lot of ideas in here. If you like the science part of science fiction, I think you'll like kind of the scientific discussions and experiments within Rama that happen in the middle of this book. If you're like me, that you like the ideas, but maybe not necessarily more hard science in your science fiction, it might not be a hit for you. Overall, I did like this, and I do think that a lot of people will enjoy Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke. Next two books, I'll be kind of brief with this because I already did a dual review for these two books. So if you want to check out that dual review for more of my thoughts, where I actually compare and contrast these next two books. First one I'll talk about is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Secret Projects, which was published last year. This is a beautiful edition. I do have to say, if you back the Kickstarter like me, you were probably very impressed with this, with all the beautiful art within, the color chapter titles and things like that. This is very, very high quality book itself, and it did add to the reading experience, in my opinion. This is a very whimsical tale. You see a girl, Tress, who lives on an emerald sea, but it's not a sea of water, it's a sea of spores, which is just interesting world building because Sanderson. And she embarks upon this quest, which I won't say why she goes on this quest, because that would ruin a plot point early in the book, but she goes upon this quest and she has no skills to go on this quest, and she has to rely upon her wit. And she's a character that I honestly didn't connect with right away, but as the book went along, I just couldn't help but love her by the end. And I thought the story itself was very, very well told. It's Sanderson, so it's plotted very, very well. There are aspects of the story I didn't like, namely there's a narrator, which is a world hopper from the Cosmere named Hoyd, that was attempting to provide comic relief, and just, I frankly didn't think he was funny at all. So that kind of hurt the narrative, but overall, this is a very quick read. It looks like a thick book, but this is a pretty big font with big spacing, and you often have kind of blank pages between chapters. So this read very, very fast, and I definitely recommend this one. I can see why people absolutely love this book. I would say I'm more in the really like category than loved it, but I really enjoyed my time with Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. Now, the other book that I did the dual review with Tress was Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay. And one reason I wanted to talk about these two books together is because they are so, so very different. They're both fantasy standalones, but their approach to the genre, their approach to storytelling couldn't be any more different. So check that video out if you want to see kind of a compare and contrast with these two books. Tigana, this is the fifth book by Guy Gavriel Kay that I've read, and I just adore the author. This is probably my fifth favorite, but I say fifth favorite because I do consider this a favorite. I think this was a fantastic book. It has a very interesting premise where this world, the land of Tigana, the country of Tigana, has been erased by magic. And this necromancer or wizard or sorcerer, I think he's called a sorcerer, basically erases the memory of Tigana to everybody in this continent except for native Tiganans who can hear the word, but everybody else just hears gibberish when they say the word Tigana. So the story is about these group of characters trying to restore the culture of Tigana, and I found it fascinating. This doesn't have Kay's best character work. There are a couple really, really fine drawn characters, but the writing is, even though this is early Kay, it's just, I mean, chef's kiss, exquisite. All the accolades you can say about his skill with a pen is present here. the establishment of setting and his world building elements. There's more magic in this one than anything else that I've read by Kay. Everything is fantastic. It has maybe my favorite prologue that I've ever read in this genre. And he sticks the landing, and he sticks the landing in a bit of a bittersweet type of way. And I thoroughly enjoyed Tigana. Again, fifth favorite by Kay, but that's only because the other four are just so dang good. This is a book that I definitely recommend for people that are looking for just a great author whose command of the English language is unrivaled and a great fantasy standalone. I can definitely recommend Tigana by Guy Gabriel Kay. Let's go next to an audiobook I finished this month, and that was Blood Rights by Jim Butcher. Blood Rights is the sixth book in the Dresden Files series, which just continues to get better. I was told going into this one that Blood Rights is kind of the last bump along the road, and the rest of these books are going to be amazing. Well, if this is a bump, it was only a speed bump, because I really enjoyed Blood Rights. I can see the bump analogy, though, because there was kind of a B story in here that just honestly didn't fit. It may fit in the trajectory of the series as far as what is going on, but it just felt like it didn't belong in this story. And the A story itself might not have been the most compelling, but I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the different characters that we met in this story, some of which will continue to follow throughout the series. But the thing about Blood Rights that made it great is there's a portion in the very middle where there are just a couple huge revelations for Harry and who he is and his background, and it'll really inform what goes forward. And those couple chapters in the middle, to me, elevated this book a lot higher than kind of the A and B stories that we got in the crux of the novel. As a thought experiment, I wanted to examine the theme of that little passage in the middle, because that's something that I continue to want to improve in my own reviewing. So I thought about this passage in Blood Rights, and I identified two themes that I think made it highly compelling and, for me, the best part of this book. One of the themes is family. Harry Dresden was an orphan, and he doesn't have a family, and this is juxtaposed with another character who has a family, but it's a highly dysfunctional family. And it gets you thinking, and gets Harry thinking about, well, which one is worse, having no family or having a highly dysfunctional family? The other aspect of this middle portion of this book that was just so good and so well done thematically is forgiveness. Specifically, it's about forgiveness of yourself. Something happened a few books ago to Harry and someone that he loved, and that act and how it came about, Harry has not been able to forgive himself. And you see that he's more consciously aware of this at this point. And you can see it kind of has affected his character the last few books. And not being able to forgive himself is something that came to the forefront when he sees the same thing happening to this other character. And he realizes this other character can't forgive themselves. And he all of a sudden turns that light upon himself and realizes he hadn't forgiven himself yet either. It was such a well-done portion of this book, and I think elevated this book above everything else. Blood Rights by Jim Butcher, sixth book, maybe a little bump, but still a very great read. I do look forward to reading the rest of the Dresden Files. I'm going to slow down, however. I've read 3 of them so far this year. I don't want to burn out and read them all real quick and then have to wait years for the next one. So I'm going to wait till later in the year to resume this series, but I'll definitely be resuming this series, and I look forward to reading more Dresden Files. All right, the last 2 books in the fantasy genre I can talk about together because they make up a duology by Raymond E. Feist, Prince of the Blood, and The King's Buccaneer. This is the Crondor's Sons duology, although it wasn't originally called that, because if you see this book, which I bought in the early 90s, it doesn't say anything about Crondor's Sons. It wasn't until he wrote the second one that he kind of paired these two together. These 2 novels feel like, and they really are, bridge novels from the Rift War saga to the next big series, the Serpent War saga. These are a generation away from the end of the Rift War saga, and we're following Prince Arutha's sons. In the first book, Prince of the Blood, his elder sons, who are twins, Boric and Erland, they're kind of the stereotypical hell-raising nobles boys that are very capable of a lot of things, but they're just immature and they need to grow up. So Arutha, seeing this, sends them on a diplomatic mission to Kesh. And we've heard about Kesh. Kesh is the southern hemisphere of Midkemia, And we heard about them a little bit during the Rift War saga, but wasn't really explored that deeply. So I think one of the things he wanted to do in this book, Feist that is explore just a little bit more of the world. And he does in this book. But early in this book, the two twins get separated for a certain reason, and Boric is isolated by himself, and he has to survive 100% on his wit. And Erland, all of a sudden, he's the younger of the twins. All of a sudden, he finds himself in Cash as potentially the heir and has to navigate all this political maneuvering, something he never thought he'd have to do. And the political side of this was very well done. Maybe not on par as the Empire trilogy that Feist co-wrote with Janny Wirtz, but it was still very well done. And of course, the two storylines converge, and there's a very, very good ending. And seeing the character growth of these two characters was quite phenomenally done throughout the book. I definitely enjoyed Prince of the Blood. The King's Buccaneer, this is set about 5 years after Prince of the Blood, and this follows Arutha's youngest son, Nicholas, who was born with a club foot, and kind of that deformity has shaped a lot of aspects of his psyche throughout his life. And he's kind of at that coming of age time as well, and there's kind of like a leitmotif between the two that he gets sent away as well. But what is interesting about this, he gets sent to Cryde, which I didn't realize. I missed Cryde, which is where Magician, the beginning of the Rift War saga, started. I didn't realize I missed it until I got back there. So it was fun to go back to Cryde through this different character's eyes and see some of the older people there that were in the original Rift War saga. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Something big happens while they're at Cryde, which forces Nicholas and all of his companions to go on this big sea voyage to this other continent. And that's not really a spoiler because there's a map of the continent before you even start the text. And they get to this other continent, and you can tell, just like in Prince of the Blood, Feist is doing some world building. And I think even more so in this one, I think he's really setting up the next series. That's where the book slowed down too much, though. There was a whole lot of exposition dumping once we got to this other continent, and it kind of dragged for about 150 pages. It's important world building, but it wasn't the most elegantly done of Feist's work. I thought he did a lot of great world building in the original series, a little bit more smoothly than was done in here. It just felt like he was throwing a lot of information at you. And this one, of course, Feist plots very well, so we get a very, very good ending. There's one aspect of the ending I didn't love, but overall I did enjoy The King's Buccaneer. Maybe a little less than Prince of the Blood, but I think both of these books are important in the overall scope of the Rift War cycle leading into the Serpent War saga, which I plan on reading later this year. So I read a lot of great books last month, but my book of the month was a work of nonfiction called Midnight in Broad Daylight, A Japanese-American Family Caught Between Two Worlds by Pamela Rotner Sakamoto. And this was riveting. This was in the vein of Erik Larson. If you've read Larson, you'll probably enjoy this. I don't think Sakamoto has quite the narrative power of Larson or the power of bringing like all of the characters to the front of the story and making them feel real. She's not as good as Larson, but this is a really, really good, riveting text. This is the story of Harry Fukuhara and his family. Harry is a Nisei, which means he is a first-generation born Japanese American. His family had emigrated from Japan for economic reasons to America. Unfortunately, you get to the 1920s and the stock market crash, and economically it becomes a struggle for this family when the patriarch dies. So the family moves back to Japan. And what's interesting in this whole story, because Harry and his sister will end up back in America pretty shortly thereafter. What is interesting in this is just seeing how in both places, Harry and his family feel like they don't 100% belong. Initially, Harry thought he felt he belonged until World War II broke out. And of course, we know what happened in America. He gets placed into an internment camp and is ostracized, even though he is an American. He was born and raised in Washington State. And even though he lived in Japan for some time, he feels American and he feels culturally American. But because he is a Nisei of Japanese descent, he's put into these internment camps. Also, on the other side, his brothers that stay in Japan, the Japanese around him, around them, Frank and Pierce, the brothers, talk about the stink of America that are on them because culturally they're just different than the native Japanese. And I like how Sakamoto kind of walked the fine line between not choosing a side as to which side, frankly, was worse to these people, because both sides were worse. I would argue that the United States side was worse. Some bullying in Japan doesn't quite get to the level of throwing people into internment camp, but that's my thoughts. She does a great job of not kind of picking sides, but just kind of telling the story and bringing the story to life. And the story progresses even more when Harry enlists in the army, and he becomes basically a translator, and he's part of intelligence, and ends up in the South Pacific. And his family, they live in Hiroshima. So you can kind of see where the story is going to go. And I thought, even though I said at the beginning that a lot of the characters didn't feel fully fleshed out, Harry felt fully fleshed out, and this is really his story, as did a lot of the other characters. But this was a really fascinating tale, and it hit kind of close to me. I actually was in Hiroshima last summer, and I understood a lot of the places that were talked about in this book, especially in relation to, where the bomb dropped, where there's now a peace museum and things like that. So that, I think, added an extra level of connection for me personally as a reader. But it's a very quick read. It frankly reads, I call this narrative nonfiction because it reads like a novel in many ways. It's very well written. This was my book of the month. I thoroughly enjoyed Midnight in Broad Daylight by Pamela Rotner Sakamoto. My book of the month, April 2024. Hey, that was my month. Hey, I had 3 minutes to spare. I made it. Probably only have to do 1 or 2 cuts. I didn't fumble over my words too bad today. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear what your favorite book was in April. And I'd also love to hear if you've read any of these books, especially my book of the month. I don't know many people that have read that. So if you've read that one, please drop me a comment below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and the Fireside Discord. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Till next time, goodbye.